My name is Maya Locker, and I'm the Senior Manager of Programming here at the Museum at Eldridge Street. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual program with Justine, Casey, and Mackenzie to explore their forthcoming collection, An American Girl Anthology. There will be Q&A at the very end of the program, so please hold all your questions for the end. But while we're going, feel free to put your questions into the chat box while they're fresh, and I can ask them for you at the end. For those that haven't visited us before, the Museum at Eldridge Street, right there behind me, is housed in the historic Eldridge Street Synagogue. We were built in 1887, and we are the first grand synagogue built by Eastern European Jews in the United States. The grand building was almost lost to neglect in the mid-20th century before our massive restoration project brought it back to life. We offer both in-person and virtual programming, and you can find all of our public programming listed on our website at eldridgestreet.org/events, and I'll put this link in the chat after this intro. Before we begin, I just want to mention some great virtual and in-person programming coming up. We always have a ton of walking tours, including our signature Jewish Lower East Side walking tour, where you can explore the neighborhood in person, and also some specialty walking tours like our food tour, our Jewish Gangsters tour, our All of a Kind family walking tour. So definitely check that out if you are in the city. We also, for the holiday of Shavuot that is coming up this week, we have a virtual program, kind of a primer for Shavuot, called Blintz's Bleary Eyes on the Book of Ruth. That will be this week on Thursday, May 29th at 6 p.m. Also, and I know Justine and Mackenzie could chime in on this, but we have our annual festival, our 24th annual Egg Rolls, Egg Creams, and Empanadas Street Festival on June 15th. From 12 to 4. It's our annual event. Both Justine and Mackenzie have worked on it with us in the past, and it's going to be a really fantastic event, hopefully our biggest one yet. We had 13,000 people last year in 4 hours, so definitely come by if you're in the city. You can find all the info on our website, but again, will put all info in the chat box. You can check out all of our programs on our website, so you can peruse any programs you'd like and register for the ones that interest you. Now to introduce our speakers this evening. Justine is a writer, folklorist, and Yiddishist. She earned her MA in folklore from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2021, and her thesis was published in the inaugural issue of the Journal of Jewish Folklore and Ethnology. She's a frequent contributor to Lilith Magazine, our co-sponsor this evening, among many other publications, including the New York Times. Casey is a food scholar and writer who focuses on the intersection of food, history, gender, and digital media. Previously, she's written for the Boston Globe, Food 52, Gastronomica, Eater, and more. She's the co-author and co-editor of several books on food culture, including the cookbook When Southern Women Cook from America's Test Kitchen. She holds a PhD in American Studies from the University of North Carolina and an MLA in gastronomy from Boston University. And last but not least, Mackenzie is a folklorist, arts administration professional, and musician based in New York City. She has studied folklore at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and social anthropology at University of Cambridge. Her research interests range from Chinese diasporic foodways to protest chants. She grew up reading all the American Girl historical collection books, subscribed to American Girl magazine, and still has her copy of The Care and Keeping of You. And lastly, thank you so much to Lilith Magazine for co-sponsoring this program. Lilith Magazine is an uncompromising, award-winning Jewish journalism which spurs feminists to share stories and generate powerful action. They bring you fresh ideas, compelling culture creators, thought-provoking articles, and transformative rituals that you'll find nowhere else. And in their spring 2025 issue, you'll find From the Sabbath Queen to Pesach Punk, Showing Up for Immigrants, prize-winning spring short fiction, and Reshaping Biblical Women. I'm going to drop some links from Lilith in the chat box if you'd like to subscribe to their newsletter or just learn more. So all that's coming to you in the chat, including everything I promised from the museum at Eldridge Street. But with that, I'm going to turn the screen over to our speakers this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you everyone for coming also. This is so fun. We have several of our contributors here as attendees. And spoiler alert, we are going to talk about Rebecca Rubin, Rebecca Rubin's phenomenal essay about Rebecca Rubin. So this is great. This is really thrilling. Like Maya said, my name is Justine Orlovsky-Schnitzler. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a co-editor of An American Girl Anthology, out now from University Press of Mississippi. We officially launched on May 15th.
And my name is Casey Hysmith. I use she, her pronouns as well, and I'm the other co-editor. And thank you all for being here.
And my name is Mackenzie Kwok. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a contributor with an essay about Ivy Ling, the character in the Julie series, an Asian American misrepresentation in the American Girl world. And I am calling today from where it all started in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, two of us are in California by happenstance. We are so excited to share a little bit about the book and the conversations and the research that got us here. We're excited to spotlight the Lower East Side, which is what tonight's all about, through the lens of American Girl and two specific American Girl characters, Rebecca Rubin, and in a broader sense, Ivy Ling. And Maya, if you wouldn't mind clicking to slide 2.
Oh, that was going to be my question
Oh,
before
I'm
I
so sorry.
dove in. All right. Well, before we dive in into the heart of the Lower East Side tonight, we wanted to set the stage and give a little background on our anthology project and American Girl in general. American Girl dolls, books, and accessories have been part of millions of people's lives since 1986 when they first were started. What set American Girl and its corporate creator, Pleasant Company, apart from its competitors, at least originally, was a willingness to go against the contemporary grain of toy manufacturing. So we're rounding the corner on a new chapter for the company and the American Girl extended universe, so to speak. Many of those who played with the dolls first in the late 80s and 90s have children of their own, while many of the youngest millennials and oldest members of the Generation Z are reliving and rewriting their childhoods with a new ecosystem of memes and adult collecting. A cross section of these two groups includes the original AG generation, who may or may not have been children, now in possession of the disposable incomes needed to buy themselves or their children the dolls and all the accessories they might never have had. Writers are revisiting the effects certain dolls and books in the American Girl catalog have had on their sense of identity, including in this anthology. And pundits continue to fan the flames of imagined culture wars as they lament everything from the company's steps towards trans inclusion to the gender presentation of the dolls themselves. In short, American Girl as a product line, as a brand, as a shorthand for American girlhood, broadly construed, is more relevant than ever, 38 years after its debut. And our book has several objectives, as you'll kind of see as we go through some of the parts of it today. It is an examination of the democratizing power of the internet and the intoxicating power of nostalgia. It is an academic consideration of the ways in which American Girl and Pleasant Company have shaped senses of self-worth and hopes for the future and created many lifelong consumers in the process. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, it's a reflective ode to the children and girls, with a capital G, many of us used to be. Along the way, we hope that our readers take seriously American Girl's influence and place within larger cultural conversations. As the American Girl brand evolved, so has its consumer base. The company endeavored at its founding to give attention to girlhood and illustrate a cultural narrative of progress for girls and women across the nation. While the brand has evolved to capture new lived experiences of American girlhood, with varying degrees of success, as you'll see, those who once belonged to its original target audience grew up and began to question whether the prescriptive storytelling of their youth led to realistic versions of American adulthood. Despite the often disappointing discrepancies between Pleasant Company universe and real life, fans keep returning to the American Girl community to help them navigate real world issues. Next slide, please. Of course, American Girl has not been immune to well-earned controversy, and I'm sure a lot of you have been privy and seen a lot of this too. The first major criticism and public backlash for the company revolved around the creation of their first Black historical doll, Addie, in 1993. Though the company did collaborate with Black historians to design her narrative and book line, many would-be buyers were still frustrated that the only Black historical doll available at the time had a backstory so radically different from the white lineup of dolls. Addie is not the only character that suffered from an incomplete engagement with difficult histories. Our contributor Mary Burke, who might be here with us on this call tonight, I'm not sure if she made it or not, so we'll look for her in the chat, is a professor of Irish history at the University of Connecticut. In her essay, How the Irish Doll Became White, she invites us to consider American Girl's best friend dolls sold as limited edition and limited companions to an established character story and collection, and the portrayal of Nellie O'Malley as such from the Samantha series, which she's pictured here in this cute little picture. Even the seeming, as she says, quote, even the seemingly stereotype busting arc of the Nellie stories, from immigrant poverty to final arrival in gentile Anglo-America, reflects the mainstream and ultimately conservative narrative of the inevitable assimilation, parentheses whitening, and entry into normative WASP values and society of Irish America itself, end quote, Burke writes. I think we need the next slide.
Yes. Thank you. So indeed, it is within Burke's essay in our collection that we are first introduced to depictions of racial phenotypes in American Girl, as articulated most dramatically by the facial molds used in different doll designs. So you'll see here I have two Rebeccas. I'll explain why. We have So Burke continues, a further indication that pale coloring was a racial marker that links Nellie to the wider Americas is that she was the first non-Latina American Girl doll to use the mold originated for the 1997 Josefina, who is represented in the accompanying book as living on a Mexican rancho in the 1820s. This mold used a more pronounced philtrum, fuller lips, and a wider nose than that of the so-called classic mold used for the white character dolls. In light of the history of Jewish off-whiteness in American culture that is shared with Irish America, it is notable that this patently ethnic mold was also used for the 2009 Rebecca Rubin, the first Jewish doll and historical character in the line's representations. So adding another layer to the conversation about ethnicity and race as depicted by the facial molds employed is the fact that the original Rebecca Rubin appeared to many collectors to have a more olive skin tone compared to later versions of the doll. So what I have here, if you look at the top left corner, that's Rebecca. She first debuted in 2009. This is what Rebecca looks like now. The differences are subtle. The tone change in the physical doll representation is actually disputed. There are plenty of collectors who say, no, her skin tone didn't change at all. It's just natural. When they produce different dolls at different times, they're going to look a little bit different. But there is a clear difference between the first pencil drawing depictions of Rebecca and subsequent portrayals, which you can see here. So there's her first entry into the historical line, and then they rebranded the entire historical canon as the Be Forever dolls. So they had a different depiction of her included in the books. I mean, it's important to also note that there's not one way that Jewish people look, but there are traits that are more common in subgroups of Jewish people, and it is those features that are frequently ethnicized and ultimately often racialized. This unfortunately does track with how non-WASP groups have encountered whiteness in the United States. So even if the use of the same facial mold for Josefina and Nellie and Rebecca was unintentional, it really does dovetail perfectly with how non-WASP groups have been exoticized and racialized as immigrant communities. Next slide, please. Professor Samantha Pickett of Brandeis University, writing in this collection about Rebecca Rubin, agrees with Burke. She says that the, quote, the interchangeability of Rebecca and Josefina as two, quote, ethnic dolls who share the same face suggests a flattening of the cultural pluralism inherent in American Girl's mission and a visual insistence on the sameness of each character, even as their differences are celebrated within the context of their stories. Interestingly, in researching for this presentation, I found an article from 2009 in Tablet Magazine, which is a Jewish magazine, Jewish publication. This was after Rebecca's big debut. Writer Daphne Merkin says, quote, Rebecca's hair color was apparently pondered for years. Preliminary research on the doll began in 2000. And while dark auburn was the first choice, her decision was to go with what a spokesperson for the company described as mid-tone brown hair color with russet highlights. My Polish housekeeper, for one, claims that Rebecca looks Irish, an assessment with which I don't agree, but to each her own. End quote. As it happens, it seems that Miss Merkin's housekeeper was really onto something, since this evidently was, in fact, the same mold used for Nellie O'Malley. Next slide. American Girl undoubtedly felt a lot of pressure in creating their second ever Jewish character and first in the historical lineup. Indeed, Rebecca Rubin is not American Girl's first attempt at Jewish American representation. Lindsay Bergman, the very first Girl of the Year, was released in 2001 and retired in 2002. It is important to note that the Girl of the Year is retired after a year. It wasn't specific to her. However, Lindsay did not sell well, and this is something that's still being debated in the American Girl community. Jewishness does factor into her story a little bit, but our contributor, Rebecca Rubin, no relation to the character, but we'll be lovingly referring to you as our Rebecca Rubin. I hope that's okay throughout this presentation. Notes that, quote, the few references to Lindsay's Jewish identity in her book privilege assimilation to American culture. This is primarily expressed by disparaging traditional Ashkenazi Jewish foods, one of the many ways that non-Jews historically marked and continue to mark Jews as other. Examples include describing a matzo ball as a, quote, slippery dumpling-like blob of mush, and complaining about chopped liver and pickled herring, wishing instead for, quote, normal stuff like cookies or potato chips. Lindsay's internalization of the disdain for traditional Ashkenazi Jewish foods and her preference for foods coded as American emphasizes the otherness of Jewish foods and consequently the otherness of Jewish culture as the whole. To add to this, Samantha Pickett says, quote, with Lindsay's retirement in 2002 and the redesign of the Girl of the Year due to Lindsay's poor sales, no Jewish characters appeared in any of American Girl's named character lines until 2009. Rebecca Rubin, an aspiring actress, budding labor activist, and daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants living on the Lower East Side circa 1914. ... Much of the nuance found in Rebecca's story stems from both Green herself, the writer, who infused Rebecca's Lower East Side adventures with stories taken from her own parents and grandparents, and from years-long research process that occurs during the development for any new character, which in Rebecca's case involved trips to the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, Ellis Island, Coney Island, and most relevantly here tonight, the Eldridge Street Synagogue. Next slide. So how did Pleasant Company and Mattel, who now owns Pleasant Company, come to choose this era of the Lower East Side for their first Jewish American historical doll? Pickett theorizes, quote, feminist literary scholar Lisa Marcus argues that part of the commercial popularity of Rebecca's stories stem from the fact that the, quote, the version of American history for sale and the Rebecca doll and the books that accompany her presents an idealized America in which anti-Semitism and anxieties about Jewish American identity are minimized and often glossed over. Marcus goes on to say that the timing of the story, 1914, which is after the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, but before the Leo Frank lynching of 1915, the US's entry into World War I in 1917, and the introduction of strict anti-immigration policies that are meant to curb Russian Jewish entry in particular in 1921 and 1924, reinforces these patterns of ideological desire that resonate more broadly throughout the Jewish American imagination. The desire for fictions of a tolerant and welcoming America, and of a Jewish American identity that fits very comfortably within it. Pickett also argues in this essay in our book that Marcus's cynicism, quote, overlooks both the intentionality and the depth with which author Jacqueline Dunbar Green crafts Rebecca's story, both as an immigration story and as a multi-generational family narrative. According to Green, placing Rebecca's story in 1914 reflected her desire to showcase the various stages of the immigration process and the ways in which, after only a few decades in the US, the Russian Jewish population had already made an impact on American culture and vice versa. Something that's really special, I think, about Samantha Pickett's interview and an essay in our collection is that she was able to talk to Rebecca's creator directly. And so in an interview that she conducted for the purposes of this book, she was able to find out a little bit more about Green's thought process as she was going, you know, not just what you're seeing reported in newspapers or kind of shared through a press release. Green told her, quote, I wanted to show the dynamics of how societies change and how immigrants make our country more interesting and stronger and open up opportunities because of their bringing in ideas that no one had noticed or thought about before. And there's an interesting note here too on the use of Yiddish in Rebecca's story. So astute readers of the series, and I'm sure we have a few here on the call, might have noticed that Rebecca refers to her grandmother as Bubby, but her grandfather as Grandpa, as opposed to Zadie. Samantha Pickett, when she was asking her about this in the same interview, said, quote, the choice to mismatch the names of Rebecca's grandparents reflects a fine line between keeping things authentically Jewish and straddling the wider culture that characterizes American Girl's approach to depicting history through an ethnic lens. More importantly, Green goes on to tell her that this specific choice provides another indication of the assimilation process that each generation of the Rubin family is undergoing. This really struck me. I find this to be a very strange choice, and I feel comfortable saying that, mainly because you're looking at it generation by generation, but to imagine that it would be split in how you would refer to grandparents that are married to each other is fascinating. But at the same time, I know that a lot of research and a lot of work went into this, so love to discuss that once we're done with the actual presentation part of our presentation. Next slide. Rebecca undoubtedly tells a very familiar story to many of us on this call and to many American Jews, which is that of Ashkenazi immigration into a major East Coast metro area. No one narrative is able to support the weight of representing all Jewish American identities, And it is understandable that the company would choose a path that seemed to speak to a majority of a minority, which is to say around 2/3 of American Jews today are of Ashkenazi descent. Still, as our wonderful contributor Rebecca Rubin notes, even in Rebecca's thoroughly Jewish Lower East Side, there is a de-emphasis in her collection on the material culture of Jewish life. Rebecca says, American Girl has sold the challah included in Rebecca's Sabbath set in other non-Jewish contexts over the years, including in an accessory set in the contemporary Truly Me line, and as part of the bakery in Claudi's 1920s Harlem Renaissance-themed collection, gradually eroding the significance of challah as a Jewish ritual food. Rebecca's plastic challah also remains the only part of her, quote, Sabbath set that is used for Shabbat ritual. When American Girl rebranded the historical line, they removed the Shabbat candlesticks and packaged them with her parlor table instead. Perhaps this is what makes Rebecca Rubin a truly American doll. What elements of her life, practice, and identity most lend themselves to being packaged, repackaged, and ultimately sold for profit to the greatest number of people. I also want to note, and I put this here just because it always gets me, as of today, 5/27/25, you can purchase this. This is the Shabbat set, and it's $70. It's very cute. I'm not going to say it's not. It is $70. In concluding her essay, Samantha Pickett summarizes Rebecca's relationship to America as powerful, but consistently challenged. She says, quote, even as Rebecca embraces her Americanness, her sense of herself as an American is challenged. This destabilization of her self-perception illustrates the tenuousness of holding dual American and Jewish identities and adds a layer of complexity to the series' positive representation of the immigrant experience. The second book in the series, Rebecca and Anna, in which Rebecca's uncle, aunt, and cousins arrive from Russia and move in with the Rubins, provides one of the series' most nuanced story arcs. Rebecca finds herself increasingly embarrassed by the, quote, greenhorn behavior of her newly arrived cousin. At first, she's excited, and she sees herself as a mentor, taking on a maternal role as she teaches Anna how to be American, influencing the way she dresses, helping her practice English, touring her around the Lower East Side. The world that Green, the writer, has built for Rebecca introduces young readers to the trials and triumphs that are faced by Jewish immigrants and American-born Jews during the immigration era. And through these 6 books, readers are introduced to labor unions, anti-immigrant policies at Ellis Island, Jewish rituals related to kashrut and kosher, holidays and celebrations, American Jewish cultural landmarks like the Eldridge Street Synagogue, and Jewish values like tikkun olam and tzedakah. But perhaps more importantly, through the characterization of Rebecca as a determined, opinionated, and creative, proud Jewish girl, because I do not think Rebecca's pride in herself is ever in doubt. Green's books challenge stereotypes of young Jewish femininity embedded in American popular culture. So we'll have a little bit more to say about Rebecca in a little bit, but I do want to now hand it over to Mackenzie Kwok to talk a little bit about Ivy Ling and Asian American representation in American Girl.
Thank you. Just to start, I want to give the just say that this is all out of love, all of the critique that I'm about to give about American Girl and about Ivy Ling and the Julie series. So my chapter focuses on the shortcomings of Chinese American representation in the Julie Albright series. And Julie is a girl in 1974 San Francisco who lives in the Haight-Ashbury and learns how to create sort of get involved in civic engagement and local politics through signing a petition so that girls can join the boys' basketball team at school or saving eagles from habitat destruction. And I'm doing this through a lens of what's called implied nowhere that you see here. The idea of implied nowhere is coined by this folklorist named Juan Zhang. He's a Chinese folklorist who asks the question, where are the Asian American folklorists in the study of folklore? And the term implied nowhere suggests that the omission of a people from a history suggests or implies that they are nowhere to be found in the history, which kind of erases a perception that they have existed longer than they have in more traditional histories of the United States. So my essay looks at Ivy Ling as an instance of implied nowhere. Ivy Ling, the best friend character to Julie, lives in San Francisco's Chinatown, which is the oldest Chinatown in the country. And her narrative is about her passion for gymnastics, finding her way in America when she eats different foods than her classmates. And her arc really supports Julie's arc. And I kept wondering why, as a girl in San Francisco's Chinatown in 1974, Ivy wasn't written into narratives about social change and political activism. When we look at the historical context of 1974 in San Francisco, Chinatown was actually a big hub for progressive organizing. During this time, the term Asian American was newly coined. It was actually coined in 1968 by student activists at UC Berkeley named Yuji Ichioka and Emma Gee. They were part of a group called the Asian American Political Alliance, and they coined that term to unite people of different Asian descents in the country to resist the pejorative term at the time, which was Oriental, to find more of a sense of unity among this oppressed group of people trying to find their voice among the civil rights movement as well. The groups like Asian American Political Alliances and in Chinatowns across the US were very engaged in tenant organizing, in registering voters, in creating programs like ethnic studies in schools and advocating for culturally informed arts programs, etc. San Francisco's Chinatown was even home to a group called the Red Guard, which was a group inspired by the Black Panthers that connected the Chinatown communities to political resources. So I argue that Ivy and Chinatown in this series of Julie are implied nowhere, despite a rich history of community resilience and interracial and interethnic progressive political organizing. San Francisco's Chinatown is much like New York City's Chinatown in the Lower East Side as well, in the sense that it is a hub for so many social movements and a hub for so many social movements that are not only limited to Chinese people as well. I think narratives about Chinatowns, not just San Francisco's, but also New York's and every Chinatown in the world, should reflect the ongoing legacies of shared cultural movements, coalition building, and community power that shape neighborhoods and cities today. I like to think that Rebecca Rubin and Ivy Ling's descendants and whatever future Nuyorican American Girl doll might that might exist are all going to go to the Egg Rolls and Egg Creams and Empanadas festival together and share and celebrate this beautiful intermixing of legacies. Yeah.
Can we have the next slide, please? So this book began with a presentation not wholly unlike this one, focused on meaning making from memes and internet mediated nostalgia for the American Girl experience of our youth. And it was shared at the annual American Folklore Society conference in 2022. We wanted to create a volume that took the subject of American Girl and all that encompasses, which we only briefly touched on some of that tonight. Academically, we wanted it to be taken academically seriously while remaining accessible and fun. This is not to say that our writers aren't tackling serious issues, concerns, and questions about representation and lack thereof, shallow storylines, and cash grabs. But we can tell you that every writer approaches their subject from a place of admiration and love, not for the brand necessarily, but what the brand has created, enabled, and inspired. Indeed, we wouldn't be here speaking now if we weren't very, very indebted to American Girl, each in our own very unique way. And so to that end, when we think about where American Girl is heading as an idea, as a company, as a part of ourselves, we're thinking ever optimistically about generations to come. And we're hoping that children continue to feel empowered to use American Girl as a springboard to create their dolls and their backgrounds in their own image. We're purchasing the menorah set for our doll that we would have loved to have as a child, just because we can, and because we have the money to do so now. And we're comfortable with diverging from Pleasant Company and Mattel as much as we feel like we need to. We can contain multitudes. We know corporations are not people, and we know we have the power to critique, to fill in the gaps, and to rip it all up and start from scratch. Our creativity is endless. Our nostalgia is ours, and in all of its complexities and contradictions. And we have this wonderful quote that we've used in the book and we've used in several presentations because I think it works so well. It's by Maria Santipoggi, writing for In Style, and she sums it up so beautifully. Lately, I've been thinking about the girl I used to be. She was awkward, funny, and had a mouth of braces. She had synchronized handshakes with her friends and lived off of inside jokes. She was embarrassed over her body and mortified to talk to her first crush. She spent her free time reading next to her Molly McIntyre American Girl doll, and she dreamed of a world full of choices. She wanted to dye her hair, get tattoos and piercings, have her first kiss, and go to college. A lot of my girlhood was waiting and preparing to choose who I could be. That feeling never goes away, and maybe that's why American Girls haven't either. They remain, as always, a way to process who we are, what we want, and who we want to become, which is just such a sweet, such a sweet sentiment. Next slide, please. And we just wanted to thank everyone so much for listening to us, and a special thank you to our contributors, Rebecca Rubin, Samantha Pickett, Mackenzie Kwok, and the Museum of Eldridge Street and Lilith Magazine. Happy AAPI and Jewish American History Month. What a wonderful crossover. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. And I love all the conversations in the chat too. I wonder if there's any convo in the chat you guys wanted to start with before we ask for more questions.
I think it's great that people are chatting. I just love it. It's like whenever I'm presenting or speaking, I can't like look at the Zoom chat while it's happening, or I'll get like so distracted. So it was really like a treat to finish and then like scroll through and see what people were chatting about. I loved everybody talking about what they call their grandparents. Like there really is so much variety in it. And I think there's a really great point to be made, which I think is the intention of the author, that they're showing how assimilation has worked in Rebecca Rubin's story to say like, Bubby wants to be called Bubby, but grandpa, you know, this is something new. This is American. This is a way that she's going to like assert that he's maybe asserting. I don't actually remember if he requests that in the book or not. I just remember that being something that stuck out to me. Yeah, it's fantastic that people are chatting about it. We're also chatting about food of inevitability whenever we have Casey here as a food scholar. So if you haven't ever eaten sour cream and bananas, you should. It's really good.
Good combo.
It's a good combo.
And Casey, I wonder, talking about you as a food scholar, if about your contributions to the anthology, any food-related contributions?
Yeah, so I was really nervous. This is my first non-food publication to ever write and to ever edit, and so I was really nervous about that. And I thought for sure we were going to get a lot of pitches when we opened up the call for contributions to this book about food, and I was like, surely everyone knows about American Girl food, and no one pitched us. And so I was very excited to step into that role because that's what I wanted to write about. And so I wrote about American Girl cookbooks, which is how I grew up with the brand and the kind of universe. I never had a doll, but I always would go to the library, and if you grew up with American Girl, you remember the American Girl library shelf or shelf in the library. It's very long and it's just full, right, of those thin, slim books. And then on those shelves were the very thin little cookbooks with historical food that was, you know, somewhat accurate and then somewhat inaccurate because it was fit for modern kitchens and little kid appetites and things like that. And those I ate those up. I made my parents help me check them out constantly. So that's what I wrote about, was the historical cookbooks, you know, what they got right, what they didn't, where they had, you know, lots of good opportunity to do better. And the fact that we don't have those anymore, especially with the lack of the historical doll collection in the way that it was anyways, the shift in focus away from the history and all the opportunities that we don't have now to talk about some really hard topics too. That because it inevitably always comes back to food. Like the Zoom chat's a perfect example. We all have different backgrounds, we all have different things that we come to this brand with, to the world with, but we all have to eat. So food is a really great way to talk about almost any subject, especially the hard ones, especially for little kids. And so yeah, I really enjoyed that. And I think I could write a whole another book about the food, but I don't know who would read that.
I think a lot of people, based on the feedback we've had from our stops so far.
Yeah.
And that's actually a really good point, Casey. You were saying how things now are different than it was back back when we were a girl, as they say, now we can say that. But what I feel like a lot of people in the chat probably have a similar experience where either they're, maybe millennials or older Gen Z, or they're the parents or grandparents of a millennial or older Gen Z, and they're used to the American Girl of maybe at least 15 years ago, and they don't know how it's changed. How has it changed now? What are kids' experiences like with American Girl now that we don't know about?
Well, one of the things we actually found out recently too on one of our other book stops was that the dolls used to be marketed for 8 to 9 year olds. That's kind of when it was started. And so all the girls in the stories are 8 to 9 years old, and sometimes that progresses up, obviously, as the stories continue. But now we've been told that the dolls are being marketed to more like 6 and 7, which that doesn't sound like, if you don't have kids, that doesn't sound like a big age gap, but milestone developmentally, it really is a huge difference. That's the difference between being able to read sometimes and not. And so that, I think, alone, there's so many other things. I'll let Justine and Mackenzie jump in too, but I think that one has really blown my mind, and we learned that very recently.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was that was stunning to hear. I don't have children. Casey has wonderful children that I'm like, I learned developmental milestones through kids for kids through. So that's how I've learned that there's a huge gap, right, between
It's
6 and 7 year olds and 9 year olds. I think in general there's this de-emphasis on the historical line. They've definitely changed how they're doing it. There was actually a lot of chatter this week at one of our book stops because I'm pretty active, like lurking and looking around on American Girl Instagram and American Girl Reddit, and folks were like, I think Molly's gonna get retired and archived because of the way that they're like discounting her collection and getting, if you want what you want from her collection, get it now. This has happened over the last several years. Dolls are brought back to much fanfare typically. I think they're really aiming that at people our age who remember growing up with all of the historical dolls available and then watching those collections shrink over the years. I mean, even Rebecca Rubin, you can't get the full collection anymore. That was a pretty brief window when you think about it. And I feel frustrated by this personally because, and Maya, I know you and I talked about this, but Rebecca came out like right after I stopped playing with dolls on a regular basis. And that's absolutely the doll I would have wanted to have. As a kid, I had a little like kid-size menorah that I was like, this is for my doll, but scale-wise was still much larger than an American Girl doll's menorah would be. You make do, but I wanted to see myself, in a doll, and so to see her come out right after that would have been relevant to me was I was very tempted by her collection, but it's really shrunk over the years, and it's not just Rebecca, it's really all of the historical dolls. I really think like something is lost in that. For me, what attracted me to the brand was, I was a Triangle Shirtwaist Fire kid. I know Casey's talked about being a Titanic kid. We were interested in these historical stories. So it really like sucked me in. It really drew me in. I tore through all of them in the library. I wanted to read every collection and learn as much as I could, but that's not everybody's cup of tea. I'll say that. There's nothing wrong with wanting a more modern girl or, the looks like you doll. They're not called that anymore. I'm sure someone in the chat will be able to correct me.
Truly me, right?
Truly me. I think
Yeah.
that's so.
Or
I mean,
truly you.
yeah, they offered a lot. I mean, that let kids create a doll that looked like them, right? Which I think is particularly important. I mean, to Mackenzie's conversation in point two, where the two historical Asian American dolls are not available anymore. If you want an Asian doll, you're gonna have to make one through the custom doll design portal.
Well, and some folks are mentioning this in the chat, so I thought it would make sense just to say it out loud too, is that someone mentioned, Robin said that there were big changes when it was bought by Mattel in 2000. And that's absolutely true when you shift from a company that seemingly on its face like was a toy company and an educational company, kind of half and half. And you could even say that the educational part was meant to be, the forefront of that, to being bought by what is exclusively a toy company. And so there's this huge shift in how it's going to be sold. Someone else mentioned too that now the dolls, and this is another thing that we recently kind of talked about, so it's not as much in the book, but the new dolls are not only aimed to younger kids, they are also, instead of a book, they're paired with a journal. And so just the reading comprehension expectations are also different, which is again really strange given that our nation's expectations of children are by kindergarten, most kids are expected to do way more than they were 20 years ago. So the actual like educational comprehension milestones and our national like academic standards are higher, are more advanced, but then like the way that these dolls are being sold doesn't necessarily correlate, which is just a fascinating kind of connection or disconnection.
And I can see that Maureen put this in the chat. This was something that somebody mentioned in one of our stops this week, that the create your own doll generator is like not available. I genuinely, this was like new to me to learn.
Brand new.
Yeah, so what are folks doing right now if they want to have a doll that looks like them? It's open-ended. I don't know if we have an answer to that. I would love, we actually had somebody at one of our stops who's like very tight with the American Girl company. Like she knows a lot of folks who work there. And I think folks asked her that question. She's like, I can't tell you. I don't have an answer, but I was like, I want to know. I really want an answer.
In the chat, we also have a comment that this person, when growing up, felt like Barbie was more Jewish than American Girl ever could be, and potentially that has to do with Ruth Handler, the creator, who's obviously a Jewish woman. But I wonder now that you mentioned that Mattel purchased the company that manufactures American Girl, do you feel like there was any Barbification that happened?
Well, it's interesting. So there is I mean, to go directly to the most obvious overlap, after the Barbie movie premiered, they announced a pre-order for a Barbie American Girl doll. This is actually something we focus on pretty extensively in our conclusion because, and I'm gonna date myself a little bit here and say that for me, it was very strange to see. I don't have an image of it easily accessible, but if you Google Barbie American Girl doll, you'll see she comes up. This is an American Girl body, like the 18-inch soft, childlike doll body, but in the iconic black and white bathing suit that Barbie came in. I do not know the year. I apologize. Barbie was never my jam.
1958.
1950. There you go.
I think that's the date.
Little yellow curls, lipstick, eyeliner.
59.
And it's fascinating because, American Girl dolls, not only were they aimed at a certain demographic, but they also were meant to represent young children. These dolls don't have defined breasts or hips. I think something that was fascinating about this collaboration is that she actually was the only American Girl doll who couldn't stand under her own weight. She has to be on a stand. So this is really, again, this is a collector item. I think for a lot of people, this was like really cool and like a total dream. And I'm not knocking on that at all, but it definitely was jarring. That's the word that I would use to think about the gap between the historical dolls as they first premiered and even the Looks Like You dolls. That's what they were called when I was a kid. I realized they're truly me now. And this, very expensive. You could only pre-order her. You had to like purchase it without actually being able to hold the doll and like wait for her to come out. And I believe she was a smash success. My understanding is they sold out, but there was a lot of conversation around this when it first happened. It's interesting. It took until this long. Mattel bought the company like 25 years ago, if not more. I'm going to get my dates wrong. I apologize. But this collaboration only happened like with the juggernaut of the Barbie movie. Yeah, I'm sure there's other folks have more to say on Mattel here, but that's just my initial thought. It's just, it is strange. Gosh, it was, I really, when I think about her, we put an image of her in the book. It just felt, I don't want to say quite sexualized, but it was just very much like this is as if they have grafted the Barbie body onto a body in the shape of a doll that just historically and traditionally is not meant to represent an adult person.
And talking about, I think, the socioeconomic component, both of the dolls in the stories and also of a family trying to purchase a doll either for their child or as a doll collector for themselves. We had a commenter mention that the Judaica, specifically in the Rebecca Rubin collection, seemed very high end for a family that were at least somewhat recent immigrants still living on the historic Jewish Lower East Side. They hadn't moved outside the neighborhood yet. And then also thinking about breaking the fourth wall and purchasing the collection for, I think you mentioned $70 for, plastic toys, of course, or purchasing the doll for a few $100s. Do you speak about that in the book, or what are your opinions on that?
I have a Chinese American perspective on that, where the other character that I look at in my chapter is Corinne Tan, who was 2022's Girl of the Year. And Corinne's story is like very much more modern and upper class. She is a skier. She lives in Aspen, Colorado. And she learns to call out racism in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is very interesting how her story later on in response to COVID addresses racism. And Ivy, who is, I believe, a first generation girl in San Francisco who lives in Chinatown in a very small apartment, her socioeconomic status is coded very differently. And so is her relationship to mobility and upward mobility. And again, like I've mentioned earlier, she does not have as active of a role in addressing these kind of systemic issues that her counterpart Julie does. So interestingly, the one that does in 2022, she is coded as much wealthier than Ivy. So I think I don't have maybe an answer as to why, but I think it's an interesting thing to point out, especially seeing who the dolls are geared towards now.
And I want to, now that we have almost a little over 10 minutes, I want to open the floor to the audience. If anyone wants to ask a question out loud, please just raise your hand, either using the icon or physically raising your hand, and I'm happy to unmute you. And you're welcome to contribute to the conversation out loud. Any takers? Mary, I'm gonna prompt you.
I just want to say hello to everybody. All the names I recognize from the collection, and obviously the editors. So it's fabulous to be here, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other takers? Arlene, I'm gonna prompt you.
I'm one of the grandmas who saw to it that her granddaughters got the American dolls, and I'm going to be in touch with them because I can't remember exactly which ones they bought, but they were treasured by them at the time. Now they're grown up now. These young girls are in their late 20s, so that was how long ago that was. But I have to tell you that having grown up during World War II, I was absolutely taken with the Molly doll. And I almost bought it for myself. It was so hard for me to resist it. I went back so many times. I ended up not getting it. And here's my question. Are you saying that it's not available anymore? Is that what I heard?
Molly's still available, but you should hop on it. Not my place really to tell you whether or not to buy something today, but I want to encourage you broadly to buy the doll that you want because you deserve it. That's really
so what was it about it that was so amazing to me? It was so authentic. Having grown up in that time, I can't remember exactly what the different things were, but I mean, it just sparked my imagination and my memory in such a way. I mean, I was already a grown-up woman. I was like in my late 20s at the time, which was a long time ago, but still, it was so effective for me as an adult that it took, I didn't have the money to buy it at that time. I had all I could do to buy it for my granddaughters. So it was hard for me to step away. So I'm glad to hear maybe I can find it again. Thank you. Been interesting, very interesting.
The little fun fact about our book cover is that the zoomed in mouth is from my Molly doll. So I had a Molly, and that's actually my doll who went to a little photo shoot. She had a little bit of a touch up because she had some dirt in her mouth. She's lived a full life, but yeah, I also had Molly. She's lovely. You should definitely buy the doll for yourself. I think the chat is really.
I think I'm going to do it. It's time for me to get it.
Do they, Justine, do you know if they do the mini doll in Molly?
They definitely did. I'm not sure what's
available. Do they
now,
still have the minis? Because I was just saying before the program that I only had minis
Katie
initially growing up.
Someone told me, yeah, they
Yes,
still do. So Arlene, they made miniature dolls that your doll could have a doll. So they're like this big. And they have one of those in the Molly. So maybe you can find one of those. So it's not just, if you don't want something so big.
Right. But just the memory, the clothes, everything about it was just so authentic. It just took me back to another time.
Sandy, I'm going to prompt you. Also, we see your collection behind you. We love that.
Yeah. Oh, I see the original Rebecca outfit behind you.
Mhm.
That's really sweet.
So, yeah, I have a whole American Girl dollhouse, if you will, is what I've created. But so I was going to say, as far as the miniature Molly, they had her available, and then the Courtney doll has a miniature Molly in her collection because she's representing a doll of the 1980s. And so she has an American Girl doll, and that one comes in a special box, which is kind of fun. But I think it's interesting. Part of the reason why Corinne's story would be more active than how Ivy is portrayed is because I think what they did with the historical characters with the friends aren't really active. They're just kind of to support the main character's story. So it is nice to have Corinne as a character as well. So anyway, that was my thought on that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Justine, I see in the chat you have a comment about queer imaginings in the book. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about what that essay is about?
Yeah, so the essay is fabulous. It genuinely made both of us in the editing process laugh out loud quite a bit. If anyone on this call is familiar with a website called Archive of Our Own, it really pulls from a lot of that. For anyone unfamiliar, that is a website where folks can write fan fiction, their own pieces of writing based on existing media and intellectual property. And a lot of folks have really taken to imagining where the American Girl dolls would be as adults if they were queer or they were part of the LGBTQ community. And it's a really wonderful, affirming, joyful essay that we really love. And Molly features pretty heavily into that. So if that's anything you're at all familiar with or interested in, I really would encourage you to read. I also saw there was a question, I don't know if Casey or Mackenzie would want to take this, but I think it's a really good one about American Girl's creation of Addie and why there was controversy and how they first kind of approached the design of the doll and having a Black historical character.
Yeah, and Mackenzie, jump in if you want. Basically, the controversy is that the first Black doll that was created in the American Girl line had all the little, I guess also to back up, if you're familiar with American Girl, they each have semi-heavy backstories. They talk about very complex issues. So that's not unique necessarily, but the chosen backstory for Addie was that she was a enslaved person and she emancipated herself, and her entire story revolves around this. And it's a really interesting story. It's a really cool concept, but it's also the only option. So if you were a young Black child, this was your only, if you were wanting to find a doll that looked just like you, this was your only option for a long time. Whereas the other, if you all the other dolls, you had a variety of traumatic experiences to choose from. And it really kind of is not on the same level as some of the other traumatic experiences that are in the other books as well. So there was a lot of controversy just around the fact that that's the storyline that was chosen. This essay that we have in our book does a wonderful job of kind of navigating that of that time period when Addie came about, but then also kind of what that means in today's society as Black girls are navigating what it means to be an American girl in today's society. And the person who wrote that too talks about parenting Black children and all that it entails with how they experienced Addie as a kid. And it just kind of like threads all these different needles together, which are threads. That's a weird way to phrase what I was trying to say, but it's a very interesting thing that we're also now seeing too with other cultural groups being represented or lack of representation too. So it's and it's gotten, there's some other options now for Black children today to choose from. And then of course we had the option to have a fully customizable doll, which we've already talked about is no longer available. But yeah, there's some big missteps, but also some big successes, and that it was a really beautiful story. Her cookbook in particular, again, I'm the food person, but she has a lot of really exciting food stories in her backstory, and her cookbook talks about Juneteenth and emancipation parties and all of these things that I think that America is only just now really learning about in the past couple of years. So that was kind of like already part of her backstory. But there was still a long way to go. So I think our essayist really kind of grapples with all of those different issues really well.
And while we're talking about a few things, obviously today we really wanted to talk about seeing as the Museum at Eldridge Street is a historic synagogue in modern day Chinatown and in historic Chinatown, we wanted to really focus on these two themes, but obviously there's so much that we haven't covered that's in the anthology. Do you want to give folks a few more examples of things that they could check out?
Gosh, I mean, there are so many different ways we could have done this talk, and that's like the joy and the difficulty of it, is that that's just like a tiny little sliver. And even talking about Rebecca Rubin, you should read both of the essays in the collection because they're fantastic. I think that 2 points of interest there. One of the essays written by our Rebecca Rubin talks a lot about restoring of dolls and American Girl doll collectors today who are creating their own characters and thinking about how they can see themselves represented in dolls that, you know, the company is never going to make, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a community, a really robust community, particularly through the lens of creating, you know, Jewish stories. And I can see that that would relate to Colette's comment in the chat too about like Sephardic background, right? There's so many different histories that are not represented by the company in canon, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to do so. The other thing that comes to mind, I think, is relevant to a lot of the conversations we've had tonight is a wonderful essay about the Felicity generation. And Casey, I know you love to talk about this a lot, so I want to hand it over to you if you do, but I think that's another wonderful thing to preview for folks.
Yeah, so the Felicity generation, for folks who don't know that term or can't like extrapolate what we're talking about immediately, because I love saying it and then everyone's like, oh, I get that when they've never heard it. Basically, it refers to a really interesting cross section of multiple generations that grew up with American Girl and were largely influenced to go into specific careers, mostly humanities, history, folklore, American studies, based off of reading these books or having these dolls as children. And so there's a really interesting data correlation between these dolls, this universe existing, specifically the historical dolls, and an upshoot in women in academia and in positions in in all those fields that I just mentioned, but also like staying in the fields as academics, as scholars, as writers, whatever it may be. And so that essay, I love that, written by Tara Strouch. She interviewed a lot of the contributors, but then she also interviewed some of her peers and colleagues, and it was resounding. Like everyone identified, all the women in, you know, in this, again, large, weird, overlapping demographic identified in some way. And like I mentioned earlier, I never had a doll, but I had access to the books. There's other people who had access to maybe not the historical books, but all the other types of publications that American Girl is known for, The Care and Keeping of You, Oops, The Girl's Guide to Manners, and several other really funny named ones. Help, which was another like manners or guide. So there's so many ways people had connections to American Girl that they might not have even realized, and now they're may or may not be in fields that are related or highly influenced by this crazy universe. We had this one person who attended our first book event who gave a testimony at the end, and she had Kit with her, and she was dressed just like Kit, and she said she was a journalist, and she is a journalist because she loved Kit. And she was just like, matter of fact, I do this because of Kit. Which was just really powerful, and I think there's a lot more people out there that don't realize they have that connection.
I do feel that this talking about Felicity generation, I do feel like I am in, but I think that at least in that time, in my memory, there was this kind of upshoot in this kind of media for kids, this kind of historical media, whether it's Magic Treehouse, whether it's TV shows like Liberty's Kids, or there were all these different, this was kind of like all the rage of, even there was a book series about each one was a specific woman from a specific period of time. I remember one
The
like
Princess Diaries or
that,
American.
something like that. There was an Indian princess book that I loved. There was a witch trials book. There were all these different series for I guess my generation at least to consume. But I think now seeing what you're saying with American Girl transitioning to more of a instead of more of talking about yourself, reflecting you versus more of an educational aspect is not a negative thing. It's just definitely a shift. And it's very interesting to think about what kind of kids this different kind of media is raising, because obviously you want to see yourself represented, but also there's something to be said for learning about history too.
Yeah, if it's anything off of what my 9 and 6-year-old currently watch, it's going to be all like space marine biologists. some weird crossover between the two.
We love a woman in STEM.
We do.
Well, I think we are a little over the hour. I apologize to anyone in the comments that we missed. There were so many comments that I'm sure we missed some. Thank you so much. That's not often a problem we have, so that's a wonderful problem to have tonight. Let's end with where people can get the book.
Your favorite indie bookseller, ideally, you can also get it anywhere books are sold. It's available now. And yeah, I genuinely, I'm a little biased because I'm a co-editor, but I think this is a wonderful collection that really, oh, Mary, you've got yours too. How sweet. I think this has a lot. I think it really has something for everybody. And there are 2 Jewish essays in it, which I often think that in a lot of other collections talking about like when they're trying to cover like specific identities and backgrounds, they're like, okay, great, we have the one Jewish essay we're going to feature, but we have 2, you know, we have there are different angles and endless ways you can talk about these characters and dolls.
I see a couple books in the gallery already.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
thank y'all.
All right, thank you so much to Mackenzie, Justine, Casey for joining us tonight. This was really fantastic, and thank you all of you for sticking around for the Q&A. I can add, when I send everybody who registered the recording of the program, I can definitely include some links to purchase and to check out the book, so don't worry about that, and have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.